A girl arrived at the hospital, middle of labor, with her face contorted by pain. Her fragile and petite appearance left everyone in a state of shock. The police were immediately alerted, and the man who was carrying her in his arms was arrested without hesitation. However, that they would discover about the hurried steps echoed in the cold hospital corridors, while a desperate cry broke the tense silence. "Doctor, please, we need help." Lazaro, with his face disfigured by anguish, held in his arm. The little girl, whose breathing was barely perceptible, her pale skin and her weak body seemed to be about to give up and weakened. She had a swollen belly that contrasted with her thin arms and the simple clothes now stained. Her large eyes reflected a deep terror, and her short and panting breathing revealed a pain Udo. The scene was heartbreaking, and the Lazarus's panic spread, attracting incredulous glances and murmurs from all around him. The stunned nurses tried to contain their expressions of surprise, while Lazarus's desperation increased. "Please help her," she cried, her voice breaking under the weight of guilt. Then she announced with a trembling voice that she was in labor. Her words were like a blow, paralyzing everything. It was inconceivable that a girl who appeared to be no more than 10 years old, so young, was giving birth. Hilda, one of the nurses, quickly ordered through the communication system to bring a stretcher to the main hallway quickly. Despite her professionalism, she felt a latent indignation that she could not hide. Bebel, between pain and tremors, seemed to lose strength. Her small figure was crushed by no one of her face. When the stretcher arrived, Hilda placed it carefully and quiet. "Promised, hold on, dear, we will help you." But the internal question persisted. How had he allowed himself to get to this situation? Lazaro tried to accompany the stretcher, but Hilda stopped him. "I'm sorry, sir, but you can't come in. You must wait here firmly," she added. "We are going to take care of her. We need to understand." It happened. Exhausted, Lazarus let out a sigh, murmuring, "I just want to be with her. I can't leave her alone." Hilda looked at him intently, evaluating his words, and declared, "But she will have to give explanations to social assistants." With that, turned around and walked quickly, leaving him motionless, caught in the weight of the situation. Inside the emergency room, the doctor on duty, a veteran with experience in tragedies, prepared for the procedure, washing his hands hurriedly, trying to push away the horror of what was happening to Faith. "How can someone do this?" she muttered with anger, reflected in her expression. Meanwhile, in the waiting room, the discreet conversations became more and more audible. People murmured, perplexed, knowing more than 10 years. A lady next to me shook her head, with her hand, face reflecting horror and disapproval. Who did this to him must be a monster. Indignation grew among those present, especially among a pregnant woman who, shocked, joined in. How can someone have the courage to hurt a child like that? Lazarus sat in a corner of the hallway, he put his elbows on his knees and covered his face. He tried to ignore the accusations whispered around him, but the words were like knives penetrating deeply. The atmosphere around him was oppressive, murmuring, and despite himself, he repeated to himself, almost like a blanket for now, it was a baby, and the baby could distract him from that goal. In the operating, the doctor looked at the pale and young face of the girl and began to act, concentrated on saving that little life that even in the midst of so much suffering continued, fighting to survive. "We will do what is necessary to save you, dear," murmured the doctor with a firm voice but full of unusual attention. Bebel, almost unconscious, succumbed to the effect of the anesthesia that slowly dulled the pain in his face while chaos dominated the environment around him. The nurses ran in all directions, whispering orders, bringing equipment, but avoiding any eye contact with Lazarus, who waited outside, anxious and desperate. The unspoken but latent question hung in the air. How had such a young girl gotten into this situation outside the thick atmosphere of expectation and horror? It was beginning to turn into something even more threatening. The initial murmur of people soon escalated into indignant conversation. "My God, she's just child," whispered a woman with a face full of shock. "Did let happen?" Another woman next to her shook her head, looked disapproving. "We must call the police. This cannot be." The attention increased. Silent judge breath. Each face loaded with disapproval and indignation, as if the waiting room had become an improv hall. Lazarus perceived that each look launched a sentence. He silenced the nurse, but trying to maintain the composure approached with professionalism. "We need to understand what happened," he said firmly, although with a touch of empathy. Lazarus, with red eye and a broken voice, answered, "The important thing now is that they help Bebel." Seeing that he would not get get more answers at that moment. Marcia just nodded, offering her some comfort. We will do everything possible for. However, a woman could not contain herself and exploded. That man should be in prison. She pointed at Lazarus with contempt. Immediately, the murmurs of approval spread like a wave of indignation. A monster! How can he do that to a little girl? Someone in the background shouted. The head nurse intervened with authority. We are in a hospital. Focus on the patient. But the crowd refused to back down. This atrocity cannot be ignored, a young woman protested. Looking at the crowd, Lazarus, as if he were the very incarnation of evil. Lazarus, cornered and trying to protect himself from the unbearable pressure around him, closed his eyes, seeking strength to bear the weight of the accusation. However, the sound of heavy footsteps interrupted the already tense atmosphere. Tall man and muscular, he suddenly stood up, heading towards Lazaro with firm steps. Without saying a word, he grabbed him by the shirt and lifted him up with brutal force. Wretch, how could you do that to a girl? The man growled, his face taken by anger. Lazaro, terrified, raised his hands in surrender. Please, don't you understand? He whispered with a trembling voice, each word coming out with difficulty. There is nothing to understand, replied the man, squeezing him even more, and with eyes full of hate. You are going to pay for this sick man. Before the situation degenerated into violence, Nurse Hilda was quick to intervene. Let him go, she ordered, placing herself between the two. They already called the police. Let them take care of it. With one last push, the man let go. Lazarus, who fell heavily in the chair, breathing with difficulty, his eye reflecting panic. Hilda made sure he was okay before addressing the aggressor. I understand his anger, but violence is not allowed. Here the authorities will take care of this. Minutes later, two police officers entered, responding. At the complaints, with serious expressions, they walked directly towards Lazarus. One of them put a firm hand on his shoulder. Sir, we need you to accompany us. Lazarus, to resist, tormented Bebel's situation. She needed, although understanding, responded. Let's investigate what is happening. Passing. But now we need you to come with us to give some explanation. With a resigned sigh and his gaze lowered, Lazaro accepted. He knew he could not do anything more for Babel at that moment. Lazaro's voice sounded firm, but it was impossible to ignore. The tension overwhelmed him. Do whatever it takes to save her, he said, with his eyes fixed on Bebel, almost unconscious due to the anesthesia that slowly erased the expression of pain on his face. All around him, the environment was chaos. The nurses were running around, hastily handling equipment, whispering instructions without daring to look at him who was waiting anxiously outside. The doubt that floated was overwhelming. How had that young girl gotten into this situation? The tension in the waiting room was thick, and soon the discreet murmurs turned into loud and full conversation of trial. My God, she's just a girl, a woman murmured. We must call the police. This cannot be ignored, another woman suggested, horrified. The place that had once been a simple waiting room had become a courtroom. Every word uttered towards Lazarus was like a silent sentence that condemned him. The air became heavy, difficult to breathe, while the looks of disgust increased. A nurse, Marcia, approached with visible nervousness, trying to maintain a professional tone. We need to understand what happened, she said firmly. Although her voice revealed a touch of empathy, Lazarus, her eyes were hollow and full of tears, she replied with a trembling voice, I just want them to help her. That's the only thing that matters now, without being able to obtain more information. Marcia promised that they would do everything possible to help Bebel, while a woman in the room exclaimed that man should be in prison. The outrage grew up as a wave, and accusations surrounded Lazarus like a whirlwind. Suddenly a strong man stood up, determined, went to Lazarus and grabbed him violently by the shirt, growling misfortune. How could you do this to a girl? Lazarus raised his hands in surrender, begging, you don't understand, but he was interrupted by the man's relentless anger before the situation. The nurse Hilda intervened, screaming for him to let him go. We already called the police. Let them take care of him. Insisted, trying to calm you, while the man released Lazarus with a push. Soon 2 policemen went straight to him with a serious expression. One of them touched his shoulder and said, Sir, we need you to accompany us. Lazaro hesitated, thinking about Bebel, but finally followed the police. Resigned, each step resonated in the room, while looks of contempt accompanied him, cutting as blades. His thoughts revolved around Bebel, the uncertainty of what was happening in the operating room, and the simple act of breathing became more and more unbearable. Upon arriving at the police station, Lazaro was taken without explanation through a dark corridor where every look seemed like a silent trial. The handcuffs handcuffs tightened his wrists and they pushed him into a cold and damp, solitary cell. They were making a mistake. He just wanted to help her. He screamed, but his words they were lost in the empty walls, ignored by everyone sitting in the dark. Lazarus began to sink into desperate thoughts, reliving the last moments with Bebel. The image of her, so small and vulnerable, being taken to surgery, tormented him, and the fear that something worse would happen to her destroyed him. Inside, with no one to defend his innocence, all he had left was the hope that Bebel would survive and tell the truth. However, the terror that she would not be able to clarify the fact was eating away at him. He knew that without her testimony he would be condemned even before a formal trial. In addition to the Lazaro's financial reality made everything even more difficult. He had no resources to hire a private lawyer and would have to wait for the public defender at the hospital. The attention was not left. The murmurs about Bebel being pregnant and the doctors and nurses were full of surprise and disbelief. The expressions of the doctors and nurses reflected a mixture of curiosity and shock as they exchanged furtive glances. For many, it was incomprehensible that someone so young was in that situation. Dr. Augusto, in charge of the surgical team, walked towards the baby. The delivery room with a serious and restless expression. In his long career, he had seen many difficult cases, but this was something completely out of the ordinary. When he saw Bebel so fragile, he tried to understand how a girl with such innocent features could be bearing such a burden. The doctor concentrated. He did not hesitate to order an emergency C-section, his voice echoing firmly between conflicting thoughts. The nurses and assistants moved in sync, adjusting monitors and organizing instruments around Bebel. She lay on the stretcher with a pale face and eyes closed in a mix of pain and exhaustion. The fragility of her body contrasted with the reality about to give birth. Suddenly one of the nurses, Louisa, called the doctor's attention. Her vital signs were dropping. The tension was increasing and the doctor responded promptly. "Accelerate. We will undergo the procedure. We cannot lose her," as he operated with precision. The sound of the heart monitor intensified, echoing through the room and reminding the team of the urgency of the moment. Every movement of the doctor was carried out with extreme care, sweat running down his body as he tried to save that fragile life. Suddenly the silence was interrupted by the crying of the newborn. "It's a boy," Senior announced the doctor, holding the baby so that the team could see him. The nurses quickly attended to the child, but Bebel remained in critical condition. The birth had been successful. His body was weakened, and the signs of instability were evident. The team mobilized to stabilize her, but the situation was still serious. "Doctor, there was a lot of blood loss," alerted Hilda, the nurse. Without hesitation, the doctor requested a transfusion to try to stabilize Bebel. She was connected to several tubes and her small body. He seemed even more delicate as he struggled to survive. The doctor watched the monitor attentively, to every vital sign maintaining the hope that his condition would improve. In the middle of the operation, something surprising caught his attention. As he looked close, he realized that the internal organs of Bebel fully developed, those of an adult woman. Child period. "This is incredible," murmured the doctor, astonished. Hilda noticed, perplexed, with concern. "Doctor, this?" He explained that there was no logical explanation for the phenomenon. Her body was adult inside, although internally she looked like a little girl. After a stunned silence, the team continued the surgery, and intrigued by what they had just discovered when the operation was over and Bebel was transferred to recovery, the doctor, still pensive, took off his gloves and mask. "We need to investigate this in depth," he whispered. With urgency, the team exchanged tense glances, still assimilating the gravity of what they had witnessed in the hallways. The news of the birth quickly spread, bringing relief and at the same time concern. The baby was almost fine, but Bebel was still in critical condition. Doubts floated in the air, and unanswered questions generated distrust. How old is Swing? How did this happen? Swing, who is Senior's father? Questions that everyone asked themselves without anyone knowing how to answer. A few hours later, Bebel began to wake up, blinking against the light in the room next to his bed. Nurse Hilda held her newborn baby, smiling tenderly at him. Approaching him, she said softly, "Here is your son, Bebel. He is healthy and strong. Would you like to hold him?" Bebel's eyes filled with tears. Seeing the baby with trembling arms, he welcomed him, feeling a wave of emotion. Tears fell as she whispered almost without a voice, Thank you very much." Hilda watched the moment with tenderness, but she knew they had to talk about something more complex. After a few minutes in silence, Hilda delicately said, "Bebel, we need to talk about your condition. Dr. Augusto wants to talk to you to understand better what happened." Bebel took a deep breath, knowing that this moment was inevitable. With his gaze still on the baby, he answered calmly, "Yes, I am ready to talk to him, doctor." Augusto entered the room with a serious expression. Walking towards the baby's bed, he carefully chose his words as he approached. Scientific curiosity and the urgency to understand his condition were evident. Bebel began in a low and controlled voice. "During the surgery, something caught our attention. Your internal organs fully developed like those of an adult woman, although your appearance is that of a child. Can you explain to us how is this possible?" He, baby, to a tired one, adjusted the baby in his arms and calmly began to clarify. "I have a rare condition that affects my pituitary gland and prevents my body from growing externally, but for inside I am a grown woman." Augusto nodded, processing the information. "This clarifies many things," he said thoughtfully. "We will need to gather all your previous medical records and document this." Bebel looked at the baby in her arms with her heart tight from a mixture of love and apprehension. She raised her gaze firmly towards the doctor and agreed to do what is necessary to help. Before the doctor could ask more questions, a nurse rushed in with a pale face. "Doctor Augusto," she said with a voice shaking with concern, "we have a serious problem. Lazarus, the man who brought Bebel to the hospital, is arrested. They accuse him of a terrible crime." The news hit Bebel like a hammer. His heart accelerated and his breathing became agitated. "Lazaro didn't do anything wrong. He just wanted help me." Desperate, the doctor Augusto stood up, now with a harder expression. "Resolve. I will speak to the authorities. Need to resolve this misunderstanding." In the hours that followed, Bebel was interviewed by doctors and nurses to gather details about her condition, while Augusto contacted former doctors who had treated her, trying to gather the necessary documentation to clarify the case. He finally met with the police chief, Captain Danilo, in a private room at the hospital. The atmosphere was attentive, but the doctor knew he had to be clear. "Captain, about Lazarus." Dr. Augusto began firmly but carefully. "I understand the seriousness of the condition, but I can assure you that he is not guilty. Bebel has a rare medical condition that affects his physical development. Although he looks like a girl internally, she is an woman." He handed the fold documents ever to help the situation with the initiative face. Captain Danilo began to examine the doctor. Augusto handed him as he read. The skepticism in his eyes was gradually replaced by thoughtful understanding. "I understand, doctor," he said, looking up from the papers. "This is a really unusual situation, but we will do our best to clear everything up." Meanwhile, in the Bebel recovery room, she held her baby tight, tears running down her face. She silently prayed for everything to be resolved, but the weight of uncertainty oppressed her heart. Every minute without news of Lazarus increased her anguish, leading her to a state close to despair. Moments later, the door opened. It opened, and Dr. Augusto entered with a look of relief on his face. "I have the news," Bebel announced as he approached. The captain reviewed the documents and decided to release Lazarus to Aulnay for investigation, but for now, everything will be fine. Bebel let out a long sigh, feeling the relief spread through him. Body between tears murmured a thank you to the doctor. Shortly after, Lazarus was led to the room by two exhausted policemen. His face still showed tension, but when he saw Bebel and the baby, his eyes lit up as if he had lifted a huge weight off his shoulders. Bebel whispered as she approached the bed. "Are you okay?" "I'm recovering," she replied with evident gratitude. "I was so worried when I found out that you had been arrested. Thank you for everything." Lazaro took a deep, the relief evident on his face, but Bebel continued with a more serious expression. "In the last few weeks during French classes, I noticed that I had lost focus. I thought it was tiredness from the pregnancy." Lazarus nodded, saying, "I thought the same thing. I thought you were just exhausted." After a pause, Bebel with a sad voice revealed, "It was not just that the man I was dating left us. He didn't accept me because of my appearance." Lazaro remained silent, surprised and moved. "Bebel, I didn't know you were going through something that for me. It has always been incredible." With a shy smile, Bebel felt the connection between them growing. During her recovery, Lazarus's dedication was evident. He cared for her and the baby, impressing even the nurses each day. The bond between them grew stronger, noticed by everyone in the hospital. As time went by, baby's health improved and Lazarus remained his side, making sure she was comfortable and protected. As night fell with the sky in a soft tone, Bebel lay down next to Lazarus and little Joaquin, feeling a peace that he had not experienced for a long time. Bebel whispered, Lazarus caressing her hair, "I like you a lot." she excitedly replied. I also enjoy being by your side. Lazaro, thank you for everything you have done for me and my son. Wrapped in love and mutual support, both knew that no matter the challenges, they would always have each other. Day after day, Bibel's recovery progressed, and the hospital that had once been a scene of tension now symbolized a rebirth and hope for his little family. As time went by, the long-awaited day finally arrived when Bebel could return home to the as they left the hospital. The atmosphere was one of relief and expectation. Lazarus gently pushed Bebel's wheelchair, holding the baby in his arms as they crossed the door. They were surprised by a crowd of reporters and photographers eager for information, cameras flashing and microphones extending. In your address, Bebel and Lazarus. How do you feel about going home? Asked one of the reporters. Lazarus, smiling, replied, we feel blessed. We went through difficult times, but we overcame them. A new voice in the crowd stood out, addressing Bebel. You look so young. How are you already a mother? Could you explain this situation? Bebel took a deep breath, aware that this was a delicate moment. I understand the confusion that my appearance causes, she began calm. I suffer from a rare medical condition called hypopituitarism, which affects the pituitary gland and prevents my body from developing physically like that of an adult. Externally, I look like a girl, but I am 24 years old internally. I am an adult woman. The reporters remained silent, assimilating their words, while Bebel and Lazaro continued on their way, ready to begin a new stage of life journey. While answering the question, Bebel was surprised by a new question from a journalist. What was it like to deal with this condition during pregnancy? She took a deep breath, looked lovingly at the baby in her arms, and responded with a slight smile. It was a big challenge. I needed special care, but I had an amazing medical team and the support of Lazaro. Thank you to everyone involved. My son was born healthy, and that's what really matters now. Another curious reporter asked Bebel, are you afraid of how people will react to your appearance while raising your son? How do you handle the juices? Bebel held the reporter's gaze with a firm expression, and there will always be judgment, but I will not allow that to affect my life or that of my son. I have learned to live with my condition and to accept the most important thing is the love and care that I can give my son, and I am willing to face anything. For him, Lazarus squeezed Bebel's hand tenderly, showing his unwavering support. Another reporter addressed him, and you, Lazarus, how do you feel with all this attention around your story? Lazarus responded with fervor, I understand people's curiosity, but what matters is that Bebel and our son are okay. I don't give importance to what others think. Our focus is to raise our son with love and protection. With those answers, the family was ready to continue ignoring the flashes and questions. In addition, Bebel knew that even he would face curious and judgy looks, but with the baby in his arms and Lazarus at his side, he felt more confident than ever. Together they were prepared for the challenges that would come, sure that the love they shared was stronger than any obstacle. When they arrived at baby's house, Lazarus helped her to settle on the sofa with all care, holding her hand until she was ready, as concern was reflected on his face, despite the smile he tried to maintain to reassure her. He was in love, but the weight of the situation was beginning to fall on him. With all his strength, he looked at Bebel and wondered what it would be like to live that love in a world that would not understand. Lazaro sat next to him, breathing deeply, while doubts echoed in his mind. What would it be like for them to do common things like go out for a walk? I could imagine people's reaction. Seeing him with Bebel, some might think he was a loving father with his little daughter, or others might see a little girl in the arms of a man. The truth is that no one would imagine that Bebel was actually his partner, someone for whom he felt something deep. He held his hand, feeling the softness of his skin, and music coming. Bebel observed him in silence for a few moments, with a sincere and at the same time uncertain look. Lazaro, I have thought about this so many times. I know that people see me. As a child, it's not something new for me, but now, with you, it seems bigger. Do you understand? She paused, taking a deep breath. I don't want to be a burden to, and then stood up, saying he would be back short. I'm going to take something important. Don't worry, I'll be right back. She looked at Hira, and although she wanted more, she decided trust. Lazaro closed the door, took a deep breath, and left with firm steps. He knew he would need help to face one person. His Danilo, when he arrived at the hospital, he found the doctor at the end of a long shift. The doctor Danilo looked exhausted, but his expression softened when he recognized Lazaro. Lazaro didn't expect to see you so early. Something happened. Lazaro hesitated, but decided to go straight to the point. Danilo, I came to ask a favor, and I know it can be complicated, but I don't see another way out. I take a break breath with an expression between anxiety and determination. Bebel and I want a life together, but her situation, that rare condition that makes her look so young, that complicate everything. People don't understand, and she is suffering a lot. We need help so that people understand what she faced, Doctor. Danilo looked at him with understanding, remaining silent and reflecting on the words of, "So what exactly do you need from me?" asked the doctor in a calm voice. Lazzaro leaned in, feeling the urgency in his voice. "We know that you have medical contact, colleague from different areas and places. We need you to take your case so that they study it, so that other doctors know about her condition, and maybe they can help find solution, not only for her, but so that the world understands and she does not have to live in hiding." Doctor Danilo assimilated the weight of the request. He knew how much it could change the life of baby having that visibility, but also understood the challenges that this could bring. "Lazarus will not be easy, but you are right. I know doctors and researchers who could be interested in Bebel's case. If we manage to make her case known, perhaps we will find solutions that can help her." The doctor outlined a small smile sign. Hope. Lazarus sighed in relief and extended his hand in gratitude. "Thank you, Doctor. Danilo, I will do whatever is necessary to improve her quality of life, Doctor." Danilo nodded, determined. "I will contact the best specialists. Let's see where this takes. And you, Lazarus, I'm still the support that she needs. I will do my part." At that moment, Lazarus knew that he was no longer alone in the fight to give Bebel the life she deserved. When he returned home, he found Bebel sitting on the couch, a little anxious. She looked at him expectant, trying to decipher her expression. But he took a deep breath, took her firmly, and sat down beside her baby. "I spoke to Dr. Danilo. I told him how much your condition affects our life, and he already gave an answer. It was quite fast. She Music, someone who is carrying out research on experimental stem cell therapy, paused, trying to gauge their reaction, is something new, still in testing. But it seems that they have already seen positive results in laboratory animal and in a few human patients." Bebel's eyes filled with a gleam of hope, but the expression Lazarus was cautious. "You mean I might look like an adult?" Bebel, in a whisper, as if he was afraid of making that wish come true. Lazarus nodded. "Yes, but Bebel, there are risks, Doctor. Danilo told me that some patients suffered serious side effects, including cardiac arrest. No, it's a guaranteed thing, and I don't want you to be in danger because of that, but I also don't want to hide a possibility from you, no matter how difficult it is." Bebel remained silent, absorbing the news, hope mixed with fear in his gaze. He had always dreamed of having a normal life without judgment and curious glances without. However, the weight of the consequences left her divided. Lazzaro murmured with a broken voice, "I don't even know what to think. On the one hand, I want this so much, but at the same time, the risk." Lazzaro squeezed her hand tenderly. "I'm here for whatever Bebel decides. There's no pressure. And I know that this decision is not easy. I just want you to know that for me, you are perfect, just the way you are. If you decide not to do the treatment, I will be happy by your side, facing whatever. But I will also be by your side if you decide to try." She smiled, moved by the sincerity of Lazarus, and rested his head on his shoulder. "Thank you, my love. I need to think calmly. This decision goes beyond what I imagined." The following days were of deep reflection for Bebel. Between nights of interrupted sleep and long conversations with Lazarus, tried to ponder each thing, each risk, every dream. Finally, one afternoon, sitting together on a park bench, she looked at Lazzaro and with an air of determination said, "I want to try. I can't spend my life thinking about how it could have been. Even if there is risk, I need to know that I did everything I could to live." Lazzaro hugged her with force, his heart tight with anxiety and hope. "Then let's go together. I promise you that I will be by your side no matter what happened." With the support of Lazzaro and that of Dr. Danilo, Bebel was preparing to embark on what could be the biggest decision of his life, taking with him the courage of someone who dreamed of living without restriction. After Bebel's decision, preparations for the nutrition treatment began. Dr. Danilo took care of all the logistic, coordinating contact with the American team that would supervise the application of the stem cell. Every detail had to be taken care of, carefully analyzed to minimize the risks of procedure, and Bebel went through a battery of tests, including cardiac tests, blood tests, and general monitoring health. Lazzaro was at her side at each consultation, supporting her in each test, holding her hand. With each result that arrived, he maintained a smile, but fear behind there. It was obvious in her eyes. She didn't want to even think about the possibility of losing her, but she knew that this was Bebel's dream, and she would do everything everything possible to see her happy. On the day of the surgery, Bebel was in the hospital, lying on the stretcher, about to be taken to the operating room. The medical team was ready, and Dr. Danilo at her side spoke with a comforting calmness. "Bebel, I want you to know that we are prepared to do the best we can for you. This treatment is still experimental, but our team is committed to ensuring your safety." She smiled slightly, trying to control anxiety. "Thank you, doctor. I don't know if I can express how much this means to me." Lazarus, who was at his side, held his face lovingly. "I will be here waiting for you when you wake up. My loved son, together we will celebrate the new beginning that we are building." Bebel took a deep breath, and as the anesthesia began to take effect, her thought filled with hope and a deep desire for this to be the beginning different the surgery long. Danilo and the team spent hours carefully applying the stem cells to the specific area, observing every detail, measuring every response of the body from Bebel to make sure that the treatment was being successful. The tone in the operating room was visible, but the effort of the team was even greater. They knew they had a chance to change their lives, and they did it with precision. After hours of concentration and dedication, finally, they finished the procedure. The doctors were exhausted but confident. The first signs were that Bebel's body was reacting well to the stem cell. Now all that remained was to closely observe the next 48 hours that would be crucial for the success of the treatment. Lazarus, waiting anxiously outside, saw the Dr. Danilo left the operating with an exhausted but slightly optimistic expression. He immediately got up, his heart racing. "Doctor, how is she?" "Everything went well, doctor." Danilo smiled. "The procedure went very well, Lazarus. Now it is a matter of observing his body and seeing how the cell mothers are integrated. The first hours were critical, but we are confident." Lazarus let out a sigh of relief, and yet his heart continued to beat strongly. He knew this was only the beginning, but he had hope. The following hours were a mixture of anguish and expectation. Lazarus remained in the Bebel's room, watching her rest, without moving away or a single minute. With each small movement of her, he remained alert, and with each visit of the medical team, his heart tightened. When finally the time came to remove the bandages and evaluate the first signs of the result, Lazarus and Dr. Danilo were at Bebel's side, who, still somewhat stunned, looked around with curiosity and anxiety. "Ready to drink?" asked Dr. Danilo in a gentle and encouraging tone. She nodded, and he began to carefully remove the bandages as Lazarus's face was uncovered, and the doctors watched carefully. Slowly, Bebel's skin looked rejuvenated, and even as if the childish features that characterized his condition had begun to soften. Bebel looked at his reflection in a small mirror that was shown to him, and his hand trembled as he touched his own face in disbelief. This is really happening," he murmured. Lazaro's voice cracked, and he smiled with his eyes full of tears, and Dr. Danilo put his hand on his shoulder. "It's just the beginning. With time, the results will be more evident, but we can say that his body is responding very well." Time passed, and in each consultation, Bebel was surprised by the changes. The following weeks brought a series of subtle but significant transformations. She looked in the mirror and saw how her expression became more adult. Her features matured every day. She gained more confidence and began to feel truly herself without the limitation. Distrustful glances and the judgments of society, Lazaro and Bebel, closer and happier than ever, began to dream together about the future. The experience they had shared had strengthened their love in an unbreakable way, and now, with the changes brought by the treatment, they had the opportunity to finally living as they wished, a life without barriers, where they could walk hand in hand anywhere without fear of other people's judgment. Finally, at the last follow-up consultation, Dr. Danilo looked at Bebel with pride and satisfaction, while she and Lazarus smiled side by side. They have won a great battle. Now it is their turn to live that victory. Months after her complete recovery, Bebel felt the signs of a new stage. Her features were visibly more mature, and her skin, before delicate and with steel features, now showed an adult vitality that made her smile when she looked at Lazarus, who she had followed every change, and marveled at how Bebel seemed more and more confident and happy, as if she was finally living the life she had always wanted. But in the last few days, Bebel began to notice something different: a slight dizziness, nausea that arose in the morning, sensitivity in the breasts, and unexpected drowsiness. At first, he thought that maybe it was just a vestige of the treatment, but the symptoms began to intensify. It was a sensation that was not strange to him, and the memory of another stage of his life came to mind. A feeling of hope and surprise invaded, and she decided to confirm what she suspected. That afternoon, she arrived home and found Bebel sitting on the bed with an enigmatic smile. She felt that something was different and approached with curiosity. "Is everything okay?" he asked, gently. Touching her face, Bebel looked at him, eyes holding the Manole. "Lazaro, I think we're expecting a baby." Lazaro was silent for a moment, processing those words. His eyes opened wide, and soon a huge smile covered his face. "Baby, are you serious?" His voice trembled with emotion. She nodded with her eyes shining. "I did a test this morning, and it came back positive. We are pregnant." He hugged her tight, spinning her in the air, while they both laughed with happiness. The joy of both indescribable. This was an unexpected miracle, a new opportunity to build a family with the woman he loved. Deep, the days that followed full of excitement and expectation. Every detail of the pregnancy carefully monitored by Dr. Danilo, who had now also become a close friend with his guidance. Bebel went through tests to make sure everything was okay, and the pregnancy was developing properly. Salt Lazarus, anxious to be a father, was already busy transforming one of the rooms in the house into a room for June. They chose the colors and even the small decoration detail, creating a space full of life that was about to come. Bebel, for his part, she felt every change in her body was accomplished. Now it seemed like a celebration. She looked at Lazarus and saw in his eye the expectation and happiness of a future that they both built together when the big day arrived. Bebel entered the hospital with a mixture of expectation and excitement. As he went through the familiar hallway, noticed glances of surprise and recognition from the nurses and from Dr. Daniel himself, who quickly approached her. It was impossible not to notice the happiness reflected in the faces of those who had followed her career and the complexity of her case in the past. Dr. Danilo exclaimed, with a radiant smile lighting up her face, "I can't believe the time has come. What a joy to see you here for such a special reason." The nurses, one by one, approached to congratulate her, commenting tenderly on the visible changes and on the miracle of the success treatment now culminated in a new miracle giving birth. The joy was palpable, and everyone in the hospital seemed to be infected by the story baby Lazaro that was already circulating through the corridors as a memory of hope. And overcoming, Dr. Danilo personally accompanied her to the delivery room, promising being by his side at every moment. Lazaro, holding the hand, returned a grateful look to the doctor, who had become a friend and such an important figure in their lives. The birth was exciting and calm. Dr. Danilo and his team acted with care and affection. Toasting Bebel and Lazaro had a moment of welcome that was reflected in each gesture, and at the sound of their daughter's first cry, both felt the tears overflow in incomparable happiness. Little Julia, a symbol of Victoria, was born surrounded by love after giving birth already in the recovery room. Bebel, still excited, looked at Lazarus with a knowing laugh. He nodded, understanding what she wanted. They called Dr. Danilo, who entered the room with an affectionate look. "Dr. Danilo, we have a very special request for you." Lazarus began, putting his hand on the doctor's shoulder. This journey was only possible thanks to his help, his support, and his care. Dr. Danilo seemed surprised, but listened attentively, visibly moved. "We want him to be the godfather of our daughter Julia," completed Bebel, holding the little girl's hand for a moment. Dr. Danilo remained silent, and his eye filled with tears. He smiled as he gently took Bebel's hand, and Lazaro was excited. It would be an indescribable honor to accompany the life of this little girl with the same affection with which I accompanied the story. They all smiled at you, and that moment sealed the bond that would unite you forever. Julia would grow up knowing that her godfather, Dr. Danilo, had not only helped give her mother a full life back, but had also brought her into the world with the same love and dedication. The life of Bebel and Lazarus continued with profound changes and full of small and great joy. Each day was a celebration of the new stage of Bebel, the appearance of a woman who continued to mature, revealing a serene beauty that before only dreamed of reaching. The Julia's present brought an incomparable light to the couple's day, filling their home with laughter and tender moments. Now, with their entire family, they experienced an indescribable happiness, a feeling of fulfillment that made every challenge worthwhile. The difficulties they faced seemed distant, almost unreal, and the love between them only grew stronger. With time, Bebel and Lazarus were great for every detail of their journey, especially for the decisive role of Dr. Danilo, whose intervention changed the course of their life. His friendship and support, constant constant source of strength. Whenever they looked, Julia was reminded of the importance of each person who had crossed her path, had influenced her story. This story leaves us with a powerful lesson. A special person can truly transform our entire life. Sometimes the first impression or a hasty judgment can lead us to make mistakes that could radically change and even ruin someone's destiny. Bebel and Lazarus were victims of judgmental glances, and many did not believe in their truth. This experience taught them, and us too, that we should never judge a book by its cover, nor people by their circumstance. That go through reality is always more complex and deeper than it seems. Thanks for watching. Comment below. What did you think of the story, and from which country is it with? Leave your like and subscribe to the channel.